Okay, welcome to week 8. As usual, your to-do list for the week is at the top of the week 8 homepage, and that's how you should navigate your week. In this video, I'm going to go into this week's materials in a bit more depth than I usually do. So here's the plan. I'm going to start with the biases quiz. I'm going to open up the practice quiz, and I'm going to say a bit about each of the biases. In particular, I'm going to emphasize what the essential features of the biases are and highlight how to connect them to the passages in order to get complete credit on short answer questions. I'm then going to briefly introduce the new material in Unit 1, Understanding the Implicit Elements. We're going to look at making implicit parts of arguments explicit. And then for the new Unit 2, Evaluating Arguments, the logic unit, I'm going to actually open up homework 8C, the part where we start setting up truth tables to evaluate statements, and I'm just going to do the homework in the video. So if you want to do the homework with me alongside the video, that might be something to do. Okay, let's get started with the biases quiz. When you follow the link from the homepage, as usual, it's going to take you to the modules section of the course. So we've got our biases quiz module, and as usual, the quizzes are locked until you complete the README. And this is just like the README for the previous 2 questions. So just a reminder that there is a practice quiz and that that's the best way to study for the quiz, as well as just general course information and the academic integrity reminder. Finally, when you click mark as done, that is what makes the quiz available. If I hit next, that's going to take me to the quiz. If I go back to the modules page, you'll see that I now have a check mark here and this has become available. Okay, back to the home page. Let's scroll down to the content, the course content, and click on the biases quiz, info, and practice quiz section. As usual, we have the basic info about the quiz and practice quiz. So I'm going to open up the PDF version of the practice quiz. And the thing I want to do is sort of go through all of the 8 biases we've been looking at are on this front page here. So I just want to go through and emphasize what the essential features of each bias is. Okay, so confirmation bias. What is the definition of confirmation bias? Got D, the tendency to engage with evidence or information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. So it's not difficult to figure out, when we're matching here, we've got confirms, but what is essential to this is that you are engaging with new information or evidence, and that there's work to be done in making sense of information and evidence. Right? Evidence doesn't speak for itself. We have to engage with it. And there are ways of engaging with information and evidence. We have to seek it out, right? So if we only look for certain kinds of evidence and not others, that's going to affect our engagement with evidence. We have to interpret it. Sometimes evidence and information is ambiguous. It could be interpreted one way or another. For example, a text message. That could be interpreted with different tones and in different ways. That's making connections to perhaps the Unit 1, Part 4 implicature, right? We go beyond what's literally said and there's room for interpretation. Well, when we're interpreting evidence or choose it, anyway, setting that aside, we can interpret information and evidence. Okay, the other thing that we can do is just notice it and remember it. Right? We're encountering just streams of info all the time, and which info we think is even worth noticing, picking up on, and then logging into our memory. That is a way we engage with new information and evidence. Or we could encounter information and we have to weigh it. It's not ambiguous. It's not open to interpretation. Is this a person, is this angry or is this neutral? It's not open to interpretation. It's, here are two different pieces of evidence. One counts in favor of your hypothesis and one against it, but you can weigh them and say, this is the more relevant and important information. This one's a fluke, throw it out, or something like that. Or this is a bad study, or this one is underpowered. So we have to weigh information. The essential thing is that we're engaging with new information in a biased way. So when we're searching for things that confirm. When we're interpreting, we're picking the interpretation that confirms. When we're weighing, we count as more valuable the information or evidence that confirms. And when we're noticing and remembering, we're only noticing the things that fit with what we already believe and logging them away. So what we already believe is affecting the way we engage with new information. So when you look at a passage about this, you should be able to say, how is this person engaging with new information? And why think that they could have some pre-existing belief that is influencing how they engage with new information, and be specific. Okay, next, framing effects. The tendency to react to choices in different ways depending on how they are presented. There is a way to interpret this very generally, right? How we think about things depends on how it's presented. That could apply to anything. What is essential to framing effects is that you are looking at what is essentially the exact same choice, the exact same information. We can present and I'm emphasizing here, the exact same choice or information in more than one way. And it's how it's presented that affects what we ultimately choose or how we judge a thing, and not the information itself. That's the framing effect. Okay, illusion of truth effect. This is another one that everyone just says every example could be the illusion of truth effect. The definition is this one: the tendency to believe information is true as a result of mere exposure to it. Don't interpret this one in a really general, vague way either. Every one of these biases are about how we can get things wrong in predictable ways, right? So it's not just this thing seems true to us but isn't. That's all the biases. So it's not just it has the illusion of truth. It's specifically about mere exposure, emphasis on mere. The reason for thinking that this thing is good or true is sort of a special case, is mere exposure. We like and think are true things that are familiar, things we've encountered, things we've merely been exposed to. So mere exposure is the key part here. Okay, implicit bias. And again, all of our biases are in some sense implicit. They're all biases because they are deviations from standards of good thinking. They are rules of thumb that will lead us to make predictable errors in at least some cases. And they're all implicit. These things are all happening below our sort of level of conscious reflection. But what we mean by implicit bias is specifically the tendency to attribute some quality to members of a certain social group based on implicitly held stereotypes or associations, right? And so here we're the social group element is key to this. Social group element. Because we've seen other biases that have to do with stereotypes and associations. So the representativeness heuristic, right? And what's important for implicit bias here is that we are stereotyping social groups and perhaps applying those stereotypes to individuals, right? So we have these stereotypes about groups. Okay, next, availability bias. Is it B or is it C? It's the tendency to assess prevalence or probability on the basis of how easily one can think of examples. So crucial to availability bias that you are assessing probability or prevalence. You have a belief or a judgment about how often something is happening, prevalence, or how likely something is to happen. Probability, risk is a kind of probability assessment, right? So if it's availability bias, there should be a belief about how often something is happening, or its probability. Now there's another bias that has to do with probability, and that is the representativeness heuristic, which is B, the tendency to assess probability of a situation by comparing it to a typical example or stereotype. And then I would add into this definition, there just wasn't enough space to fit it, and in doing this, ignoring relevant probability information or just plain getting probability stuff wrong. So instead of thinking through this in a way that carefully attends to the relevant information to make a probability assessment, we're just going, does it sound like a stereotype or a typical example? It's easier. That's why it's a shortcut. It'll often be good enough often enough, but because it's a shortcut that doesn't really capture the underlying probability info, we're going to make mistakes in predictable ways. Okay, so what is the essential difference between representativeness heuristic and the availability bias? They both have to do sort of like with thinking of examples or whatever. So when you think of availability bias, you have a belief about probability. That's true of both of them. And your way of testing it is to go, how easily can I think of examples of this, right? So if I'm thinking, how risky is a shark attack when you're on your way to the beach? And if you sort of scan, like, how easily can I think of examples? Well, it's really easy. I can think of all kinds of examples, vivid ones because of our media and what both news and entertainment media, right? So because it's so easy to think of an example, I might overestimate how often this actually happens, how likely it is, how risky it is. And the paradigmatic case for representativeness heuristic is something like the Linda case, which we saw in at least 2 different places in our materials. So judging that we've been given this description of Linda where it sounds like she's sort of a feminist, social justice warrior, we might call it today. This is an older example. And then we ask, is it more likely she's a banker or a banker and a feminist? And instead of going with thinking through this according to the rules of probability and taking into consideration the relevant probability information, we skip all that. And we go, sounds like a feminist to me, it must be more probable that she's a feminist. But it's never more probable that she is both this and that than just a banker. Maybe it's equally probable, but she's a banker either way, so you're adding a second thing. So that can't work. And the other kind of example is the base rate error. That's the other paradigm case of representativeness heuristic. So you're judging how probable something is, but you're ignoring base rate information that is so examples we looked at for this where you are given, say, a personality description or a description of a person's behavior, and you sort of log, sounds like an engineer to me. But importantly, other info in that passage told us something like there's only 2 engineers at the party and everyone else is a lawyer or whatever the example said. And so knowing this base rate information, that there are very few engineers, should change our probability assessment. But instead of thinking about the probabilities, that information that we're given and that is relevant to getting to the right answer, we go, this sounds like a stereotype I already have. I can categorize this person more easily than I can take into consideration probability info. And that's what's at the heart of representativeness heuristic, is not paying attention to or outright misunderstanding probability and how it works and what's relevant. Just to fill out this overview of representativeness heuristic, there are 2 other examples in the text beyond the Linda case and the base rate fallacy, so the conjunction fallacy and the base rate fallacy. And one of them is the gambler's fallacy, right? So if you are playing roulette, if you don't know what roulette is, I don't really know much about it other than there's red and black, and I think it involves spinning a wheel, but the point is a thing can come up red or black. And the gambler's fallacy is to reason something like, it's come up black 8 times in a row, so red is due. Similarly, if we're flipping a coin, right? If we've got 4 heads in a row, to think that there's a higher probability that your next flip will be tails. Now, if you know that the actual flipping mechanism or roulette wheel is fair, that is, it actually has a probability of 1/2, right? You might suspect if I flipped a coin and I've got 4 heads in a row, now it's 6 heads in a row, that I'm not doing it right. I'm not actually giving it a fair flip. I'm cheating in some way. But if it's actually fair, the fact that you've got a run of 5 in a row does not affect the probability of the next flip. So in this case, we have essentially a stereotype about what randomness is. And we are really wrong about what randomness looks like. We don't expect there to be long runs of, like, say, 4 to 8 of outcome in a row. So really, we are sort of comparing things to examples or stereotypes or past experiences and either not paying attention to or misunderstanding the probability info that we have at our disposal that is required to get to the right answer. So that's what's essential to representativeness heuristic. And availability bias is about drawing upon our memory, our storage of examples. And think of the contrast here. What we would need is not just understanding of the laws of probability, like a conjunction is never more probable than a single event, but what we would need is more data. In order to figure out the risk of a shark attack, we need to go look at data. We need to be collecting it in a way that is representative, and then we need to go look at that. Our own personal experience is a very limited data set. We've only got data on what we've encountered and logged away and remembered. And the things that affect what we encounter, say the media and how memorable it is, the way it's portrayed, can skew our ability to make sense of the data we actually do have, which is going to be limited no matter what. Okay, so this is about the data we have in our memory and using that as a shortcut when we don't have probability, the better, or just not getting the better data that we need. Okay, so we've talked about availability bias and representativeness heuristic. Finally, 2 more. Fundamental attribution error. So this is the tendency to interpret behavior of another person in a way that underestimates the relevance of the situation and overestimates the relevance of character. So essential features here. We are interpreting something is important. We are interpreting behavior. So if you were doing a passage analysis question, you should be able to explain who's interpreting whose behavior. Okay, someone's behavior needs to be interpreted, and there's more than one way to interpret it. You can interpret this behavior as the product of who this person is, their character, their intentions, something that's about them. You would point at them and say, you're responsible for this behavior, you're doing it on purpose, it's part of who you are, it reflects on you in some way, sort of that kind of stuff. It's internal to the person is another way. This category of explanation is option number 1. And option number 2 is the situation that you're in is relevant. Maybe you just happen to be distracted. It's not like you just are a distracted person. The situation is such that you were distracted. So these kinds of like temporary situational factors are another explanation for why somebody behaved the way they did. And the claim here is that we have a tendency to overemphasize character, internal stuff that we would pin on the person as sort of a more permanent part of who they are. We are looking for the person, not the situation or temporary changeable things, as the explanation for why people did stuff. Perhaps we can hold them responsible and be mad at them. I don't know. Okay, so when you encounter a passage, you should be able to say that behavior is being interpreted, and you should also be able to say how it's being interpreted so as that the explanation for that behavior is who the person is or something internal or intentional. And then also, if you can, what are the alternatives that might be underestimated or not considered? What are the situational factors that could also explain this behavior? A complete answer would have all of those components. Oh, we skipped one. Finally, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the tendency of low ability individuals within a domain to overestimate their competence in that domain. So there should be a person who is overly confident, who has a high estimation of their own competence, skill, ability, and a reason for thinking that that competence is overestimated by the person. And why do we get this? Because the same skills it takes to be good at something are required to assess your goodness at this thing, right? Your competence. So now we've got the essential features of each one. Let's finish by doing an example where we have to connect, right? So don't even necessarily read the example here. Just let's take a look at the guided answer. We see the person in this passages of thinking may be affected by the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that is the tendency of low ability individuals within a domain to overestimate their competence, skill, ability, whatever, in that domain. So when you go to connect, we know we need to connect details from the passage to the definition. And what's essential to the definition? That this person doesn't actually have a high level of ability in some domain, and that person is overestimating their competence in that domain. So what is the evidence from this passage that, in this case, Jeremy is overestimating their competence, and why think that they might actually have a lower level of skill than they think they do? So we need to support those two things. Okay, so let's go to the passage. Jeremy's a programmer at a large software company. His immediate supervisor, Jada, has determined that, at best, Jerry is a middling performer. His code's a mess, and he's pretty slow. Okay, so we're already having some evidence that he is a middling performer. He doesn't have a high level of skill at something in particular. Okay, last month was his performance review, and Jada gave him a fairly low score, so another sort of piece of evidence that's related to the other one, just that he's underperforming or not at a high level of skill in some domain, programming. Okay, upon reading his performance review, Jeremy thought to himself, WTF, I'm one of the best programmers in this department. What kind of rating scale are they even using if I got a low score? This performance review is stupid. It's just assessing a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with actually being a programmer. Okay, before connecting, just focusing on answering the question, connecting it to the text, it is possible Jeremy is correct. We don't have enough information to get to the bottom of the truth here, right? Also, it's totally made up. I wrote this. But it could be that in a situation like this, the person is high skilled and the person who's evaluating them isn't in a position to do a good job of it, and it's all a bunch of BS, and Jeremy does know better. Possibly. But there are some telltale clues here that at least raise the plausibility of a common kind of bias that is worth being aware of, right? So what gives us clues that this is a bias that could be affecting Jeremy's thinking worth considering? So we can point to the fact that his supervisor has evaluated his performance, his skill level, as being middling to, receiving a fairly low score, but Jeremy clearly thinks he is one of the best in the department and that he's awesome. So he's clearly estimating his competence to be high, and someone else is estimating it to be low. One possibility is that he has a low skill level and is unable to accurately assess his own competence, and so is overestimating his competence. And so connecting this part of the passage and this part of the passage to support your claim, you're essentially making an argument here. You're arguing that this could be a case of Dunning-Kruger effect, and you have to connect the details from the passage to the most important parts of the definition of Dunning-Kruger effect. Okay, let's do sort of one more very quickly because it's one you've seen before. So Selma often worries that her classmates don't really like her. Earlier today, she passed Sophia near the library. She called Sophia's name and waved, but Sophia didn't acknowledge her and waved back. Now Selma is worried that Sophia is annoyed with her. As we saw in the homework, there are two especially plausible biases that could be affecting Selma's thinking. The passage analysis criteria require that you make a claim about, and you only need one for any quiz session. You just need one. In fact, I prefer you just give me the one you think it is and don't try to scattershot hit all of them, because we start adding in a bunch that really aren't there and giving sort of crappy explanations, I'm going to give you a lower score. So just give me the one that's a good fit and give a good defense of your claim. So your claim is, in this case, what? It could be bias X. Define the bias and then connect details of the passage to support your claim that this definition does fit this passage. It could. Okay, so the two here are confirmation bias and fundamental attribution error. Recall what's essential about confirmation bias? It's about engaging with new info or evidence in a biased way. Why is the way biased? Because the way we're engaging with new info or evidence is somehow driven by our pre-existing belief or hypothesis, and that leads us to engage with new information in a way that can only confirm what we already believe. So if we're going to say this is a case of confirmation bias, we need to explain, one, what is her pre-existing belief? How is she engaging with new evidence in a way that can't help but to confirm her pre-existing belief? Okay, so we definitely have evidence of a pre-existing belief. She worries that her classmates don't like her. So she's got this belief, people don't really like me. Now she has encountered a new piece of information. Sophia didn't wave at me. Pre-existing belief, piece of information. Now there's the intellectual part where we make sense. What does this mean? What does it mean that Sophia didn't wave at me? How do I engage with this new information? It's not a case of searching for it. It just happened. She didn't go out looking for all of the cases where people didn't like her. I mean, in some sense we say you're just looking for it, but that's not literal. So she's not really out there searching for it, right? She's encountered it. So is she interpreting? That's a good fit because Sophia's behavior is open to interpretation. She could be not paying attention, or she could just be clueless and didn't see it, right? There's more than one interpretation, and which interpretation she has picked that Selma must be annoyed, the interpretation she picked, this behavior is Selma being annoyed confirms what she already believes. The other one didn't, so that wasn't the interpretation we went with, right? So that's going to be a good fit. She's interpreting information in a way that as Selma being annoyed when there's another interpretation possible, and this interpretation fits her pre-existing belief that her classmates don't really like her. That's connecting the details to the essential parts of the definition. Now, the minute we say, like, she's interpreting behavior, the evidence is someone's behavior, that rings a bell for fundamental attribution error, which is all about interpreting other people's behavior. So we have a tendency, when interpreting other people's behavior, to attribute that behavior to something about them, something internal or stable or character-like, something they're responsible for, something they take ownership of, and not just a thing that happens to be happening, a changeable thing, not a situational factor. So if we're going to make the case, we have to state it is fundamental attribution error, define what fundamental attribution error is, and then connect the passage to that definition. So we need to say, how is she interpreting someone's behavior? Sophia didn't wave back. This is open to interpretation. Specifically, there are two ways that are relevant here. Interpreting behavior as a product of Sophia's own intentions, internal stuff, or a product of the situation, not really about who Sophia is and her intentions. And she goes with the attributing it to who Sophia is and her intentions. Sophia is annoyed. It's not just a thing that's part of the situation. Oh, she just happened to be distracted at the moment. This doesn't suggest like her stable feelings of annoyance with me or her feelings about me, right? So there's a good case to be made for fundamental attribution error, and that should be spelled out in terms of the actual details of the passage. Okay, so that's a quick review of what's essential to each of the biases with suggestions for really emphasizing this third part of a complete definition where you connect details to what is essential to the definition. Okay, next, let's take a very quick look at the new material in Unit 1, Mod 7, Implicit Elements. So I could click here, or I could scroll down and go here. So the goal here is to identify implicit parts of arguments, and the parts of arguments are premises and conclusions. As we saw in Unit 1.4, implicature, we often mean much more than we say, and we leave pieces out. We leave out premises and conclusions. We expect our interlocutor, the people we're conversing with, to be cooperating and to just fill in any obvious implicit premises or relevant assumptions, background information, and to supply the conclusion if we leave it out. So we'll see examples where you've left out a premise or a conclusion, and in reconstructing the argument, because our goal is to illuminate the argument, fill it out, make it as clear as possible, we're going to include the implicit premises. Sometimes those premises will be really basic, trivial, so trivial it was hard to come up with them because they were so obvious. System one thinking just filled it in. And now that we're learning how to do this, you're like, what could it even be? So it's weird that you are automatically doing a thing, but are having a hard time describing what it is you're doing. So sometimes there'll be trivial cases, but other times the things that your brain will just automatically fill in are actually not trivial. They're things that we could reasonably disagree about. They require sort of like value judgments, and sometimes are the most important parts of an argument. So making them explicit is good. The text this week, as usual for Unit 1 stuff, is supposed to be essential. It's not that long, and it goes through lots of examples, and looking at examples is super important. So definitely do read the text. There is an interactive video to go with it. That's also good. And then, as usual, there's extra practice exercises with complete solutions. Okay, so that's our plan for Unit 1. We're making the implicit bits explicit and doing it in a way that ideally makes the argument valid. And finally, let's turn to Unit 2, Mod 3, Truth Tables. So I could click here or scroll down to, these are all the same link. We're in week 8, it doesn't matter which one we click. Okay, we've been doing truth tables for a week already, and we've got another couple to go. So let's look at week 8. What are we focusing on this week? Pages 15 to 22 of the text. There are associated practice exercises. By the end of this week, we should be able to define conjunction, disjunction, conditional, negation, truth functions. We should be able to say them in words and with tables. What does this mean? What do you mean the truth functions? It's explained in the text. And we should be able to determine possible truth values for compound statements by constructing truth tables. Before, we were just given T and F, right? We're just given truth values. Now we're going to look at statements, maybe like A and B. I don't know what A and B stand for. I've just been given A and B. And I want to know, is this true or false? Well, I don't know if it's true or false unless I know whether A and B are true or false. And I don't know if they're true or false. So what I'm doing with the truth table is setting up the possibilities. What about when A is true and B is false? Well, then it's false. What if the opposite is the case? Still false. What if they're both false? Well, then it would be false. What if they're both true? Aha, that's when they're true. So there are possibilities, and we're using tables to keep track of the possibilities. So the first homework is going to walk us through setting up the table. And then the second homework is going to be examples where you complete the table for single compound statements. So let's take a quick look at the text, and then I'm going to open up the homework and just do it in this video. So if you want to do the homework with me, that would be an effective way to complete this assignment. Okay, so we're going to pages 15 to 22. We did all the symbol game stuff already. And now we're getting to truth tables for single compound statements. When I say you should be able to define the truth functions, the conjunction truth function, in words and with tables, consider this page 15, the definitions. So here's the definition of the conjunction truth function in words. A conjunction is true when both conjuncts are true. Conjuncts are the parts of a conjunction. And false if either or both conjuncts are false. Now I'm using Greek letters here to stand for these could be any statement, not necessarily atomic, any statement, compound. If you've got a conjunction of two statements, what this table represents is this definition. So a conjunction is true when both conjuncts are true. So when both are true, the whole conjunction is true. And it's false if either or both are false. So these are the three possibilities where either or both are false and the conjunction is false. So this is just a way to represent this definition. One of the most common mistakes that students make when they're just getting started is thinking that any time you have a conjunction that this column's going to be TFFF. And that's not true. This doesn't represent, like the column always has to be TFFF. It means when you've got two parts that are true, this part has to be true. We'll see what we mean when we actually get to an example. The point just being, this is page 15, these are the definitions. You should be able to say this in words and have the table version sort of memorized. This is one of the things worth memorizing, though as with everything in this class, memorizing isn't going to get you too far. We need to be able to do because we've learned skills. Okay, so now let's go back to the home page and get started with homework 8C, truth tables basic setup. Now you get multiple attempts at this, and a common strategy for completing homework that I'm seeing some people do that is definitely not effective is just quick either submit a blank first pass or just sort of fill it in at random and then use the answers to do the next version, next attempt, and do them back to back. That's not a particularly effective way to actually test your understanding and then learn the material. As a general rule, like especially for the first one, if you want to just definitely don't submit a blank, but like go through and do your best just to see where you're at before you get started, that could be fine. But then if your next step is to just redo the assignment and use the old answers for the new one, you're not going to learn much of anything. The next step is to sort of try to see what you need to work on and go back to the materials and do a lot of practice exercises, which I think most people are doing. But for this one, I'll just tell you now, there aren't multiple, the questions aren't going to change with each attempt. I don't think. There might be one or two, but I think for the most part, the questions are going to be the same. And this is kind of a tedious one. There's a lot of stuff to fill in. So do it, it's guided. Make sure you actually do it right the first time and read all the instructions. It really guides you through doing it. Even without this video, the homework itself provides enough guidance to get 100%. But this is foundational for the truth table material, and having this down pat is crucial. So the understanding, not the homework points, is what matters here. So complete the definition. The negation truth function. A negation is true when the statement being negated is false. And you can either write in false or F, it doesn't matter for these ones. And it's false when the statement being negated is true, or just T. Now for actual tables, just use T's and F's. Do not write out true and false. And as we get longer tables, you'll be grateful that we don't do that. Okay, so here's the table version of it. When a statement is true, the negated part is false. When a statement's false, the negated part is true. Why are there only two rows? Where are these T's and F's coming from? Well, we know for any statement, compound or atomic, it's either true or false. Those are the only possibilities. So each case is a possibility. And when one possibility, T, is the case, then not theta will be F and vice versa. Conjunction truth function. So a conjunction is true when both conjuncts, both parts, it's good to get comfortable with the jargon, are true. And it's false if either or both are false. Now let's complete the truth table definition. And I recommend, if you know that there's only one case where a thing is T or F, look for that case. So we've got 4 cases, 4 possibilities. They're either both true, one's true and the other's false, vice versa, or they're both false. We know that a conjunction is only true when they're both true. So I can put a T here, and then All the other cases are just automatically like, I fill those in as F. Why are there 4 rows and not 2? Because we have 2 statements, right? There's 2 parts, 2 conjuncts, 2 statements, and we don't know whether they're true or false. We just know that each one is either true or false, and there's 4 combos. They're both true, one or the other, both false. So let's construct a truth table for a compound statement. This is a conjunction. A and not B are its conjuncts. One conjunct is itself a compound statement. It's a negation, and the negated statement is B, which is an atomic statement. So step number 1, determine the number of atomic statements. To do this, we're just counting the number of different letters. Not B is the negation of an atomic statement. So we've got A and B. If there are multiple A's and B's, it's still just 2 atomic statements. So 2. Next, we determine the number of rows. And the number of rows depends on the number of atomic statements. If you have 1 atomic statement, there's only 2 possibilities, T or F, so you need 2 rows. If there are 2 atomic statements, there are 4 possibilities, these ones, so we need 4 rows. If there are 3 atomic statements, now there are 8 possible combos of T's and F's that those statements could have, which means we're going to need 8 rows. And if there are 4 atomic statements, we're going to need 16. And if 5, 32, it blows up quickly. We're only going to do up to 3 atomic statements. This is a potential limitation of the truth table method. How many rows will we need? 4. And you can spell out 2 or 4 and get full credit as well. Next is to set up the truth table. So be sure to read these carefully. 1, make a column for each of the atomic statements and put them in alphabetical order. This doesn't matter for logic, but it matters for everyone's table looking the same and getting full credit on these auto-graded homework problems. So make a column for each statement, column for A and B, put them in alphabetical order, A then B, leave some space for more columns, like if you're hand doing this, you'll leave some space. Next, we make 4 rows. Header is not one of our rows. So we've got 4 rows, and then we fill in all the possible combos of T's and F's into the atomic statement column. We don't need to know anything else. We'll fill these in right away, automatically, the same every time. If there are 2 atomic statements, we're just trying to get every combo of T's and F's they could have so we can figure out the actual truth value or the possible truth values of the whole statement. And always do it in this way. Start with the first column and make the top half T's and the bottom half F's. Then cut that in half and make TF. By your last column, in this case there's only 2, the column should just be TF, 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 right? So the reason to do it the same is so that your homework assignments will all be the same and you'll get full credit on auto-graded stuff. So now you try it. We're just copying this down. We need to make a column for each of the atomic statements. We put them in alphabetical order. The first column is top half T's, bottom half F's. The next column is every other. And the goal is to make sure we have every combo. Done. Next, we make columns for the rest of the statement. You will need a column for the whole statement. In this case, A and not B. But we can't just, we can't cut not B out of it and just go straight to this, because we need to know the value of not B in order to figure out the value of the whole thing. So we're going to put not B in its own column. Now we need to know its parts in order to calculate not B, but its part is an atomic statement and it's already in here. Okay, so we've got the final statement we're actually interested in is in the table, and every part of that statement is also already in the table. So now we'll use our rules for negation and conjunction to complete the table. So for not B, whenever B is T, not B is F. Whenever B is F, not B is T. T will be F, and whenever it's F, it's T. Okay, next. And let's see, you can see it filled in, so it would be hard to, it's pretty guided. You get the right answers as you're going through this. So the truth of not B depends on the truth value of B. We're looking at this column to figure out this column. Now, we need to figure out the column for A and not B. The truth value of this statement depends on its parts, A and not B. So we need to look at the column A and the column not B in order to fill this in. So if you're following along with your own homework, pause and do it on your own before seeing where it goes, if you want. Okay, so we've got T and F. Remember when I said earlier, the best way to do this, the way to limit your potential to make silly little errors that when you look back on them, you're like, I can't believe I did that, I knew that. Look just for the special case. Oh, I put that tip here. Look for the special case. There's only one case where a conjunction is true, when both parts are true. Every other case it's false. So let's look through the columns for its two parts and look for the case where it's both true. There may be more than one, and it's not always the top one, so we got to find it, right? Row 2 is where they're both true. Are there any other rows where they're both true? No. So now that I filled in the one case we know is true, the rest are F. And when we scroll down, oh, I guess we're done with this one. So that is the final complete table. We have figured out all of the possibilities for A and not B. Now, another kind of question that you saw when you were doing the symbol game is, let's just assume that A and B are both true and X, Y, and Z are false, right? Figure out the truth value. Well, if we assume these are true, that means this is true and this is not T. T and not T. Not T is F, so now that becomes T and F, and T and F is F. Well, notice that's just row 1 of this table. That's the case where both A and B are true. When both A and B are true, the whole thing is F. What we were doing in those examples was just stipulating a particular row, but there were other possibilities, and that's what the truth table captures. Okay, next, conditional truth function. A conditional is false when, remember this is the special case, there's only one way a conditional statement can be false. It's false when it has a what antecedent, that's the first part, a true antecedent, and a false consequent. It's true in all other cases. Now let's complete the truth table definition. There's only one way that it's false when the antecedent, that's the first part, is true, and the consequent, the second part, is false. That's only on row 2. Every other case is going to be true. And importantly, the antecedent, so this conditional is in the same order as the columns we have to look at in order to figure out its truth values. That won't always be the case. We're looking for the antecedent being true and the consequent being false. That's when it's false. Every other combo is true. So this is a table version of the definition. So let's do another practice problem. The instructions are to construct a truth table for the following compound statement. Maybe a quick try doing it on pen and paper, setting up a whole table and completing the truth, figuring out the truth value for the statement on every row on your own before going through the rest of this assignment or watching the rest of this video. Okay, step number 1, number of atomic statements, we're just counting letters, that's 2. Determine the number of rows. When there's 2 atomic statements, that's 4 rows. Set up the truth table. Make a column for each statement, put them in atomic statement, put them in alphabetical order, leave some space, make the required number of rows, and immediately fill in the T's and F's for the atomic statements. So there's 2 statements, we need 4 rows. We're going to put them, now they're not in order, but so that'll be tricky sometimes, but we need to make sure we put them in order. And then we immediately, so we leave some space, we've got 4 rows, and now we fill in the T's and F's, and we do it the same. We don't need to know anything else about where we're going. This is going to be the same for every 4-rowed truth table. Go top half T's, bottom half F's, every other. So you should always have 2 T's as the top row and 2 F's as the bottom row. Okay, so now we need to make columns for the rest of the statement, and the statement we ultimately want is here. Does it have parts? Yes, but those parts are just atomic statements and they're already in the table, so we're done. And now we use the rule for conditional to complete the table. There's only one case where a conditional statement is false. That's when the antecedent, that's E, is true and the consequent is false. So is there a row, one or more, where E is true and A is false? True, true. False, true, true, E is true, A is false. So here's a row where the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. That's the only one, so the rest we automatically can fill in with T's. So tip, we're looking for the special case. It's a way to cut down on the number of choices you have to make and thereby cut down on the number of errors. And tip, memorize these rules as stated in English. If you've memorized the table, so let's scroll back up to the definition table, it goes TFTT. That's not going to be true of every conditional statements. This doesn't say TFTT. You're not memorizing the table, you're memorizing the rule. And the table is just a representation of that rule in a visual form. So we're looking for the case where this is true and this is false, it'll be false. Okay, so quick, let's do atomic statements required and rows needed. I'm just going to do column 1 first. How many statements here? We're just counting numbers of letters. B, X, Y, that's 3 letters. P, Z, that's 2 letters. S and W, that's 2 letters. P, Q, R, 3 letters. Only the letter P, that's 1 letter. Okay, now number of rows needed. All we need to know to figure out number of rows is how many statements there are. For one statement, 2 rows. 3 is 8. 2 is 4. 2 is 4. 3 is 8. 1 is 2. And again, why? Because a statement is either true or false, and we need a row for each possibility. If you have 3 statements, each statement is true or false, but there's 3 of them, so there's 8 combos. TTT, TTF, TFT. You get the idea. Okay, one more to define. Disjunction truth function. A disjunction is true when either or both disjuncts are true, and it's false when both disjuncts are false. This is the special case. There's only one way a disjunction is false, and that's when both disjuncts, its parts, disjuncts, are false. So let's just look for, we've got pi and psi here. We're looking for when, no, not pi and psi, theta and psi. No, phi and psi. I know my Greek letters, barely. So we've got phi and psi here, and we're just looking for the one case where they're both false. That's the last case. That's when a disjunction will be false. It'll be true in every other case. This is a sort of visual representation of what this definition says. Okay, construct a truth table for the following compound statement. So again, we're going to start by figuring out the number of statements. There's 3 different letters. That's 3. When we've got 3 statements, we know we need 8 rows. So we set up the table. First, make columns for our atomic statements in alphabetical order. We'll leave space for more. We'll make the required number of rows. We know we're going to need 8, and we're going to fill in all the T's and F's for the atomic statements before we even get started. So there's really, other than counting number of letters and knowing just the general rules, this will be the same for every kind of problem, right? So I know I've got 3 statements. That means I need 8 rows. A, C, G in alphabetical order. And now it's time to just fill in my 8 rows of T's and F's for the atomic statements. Start with column 1 and make the top half T's, bottom half F's. Now we're going to cut that in half. So this was 4 rows. Halvesies here, that's T, T, F, F. T, T, F, F. And now cut that in half, the T's here, T, F, T, F. F, T, F, T, F. And your last column should always be alternating T's and F's. Sorry, I'm not capitalizing, it's not as clear. But that's the way to fill in 8 rows every time you make an 8-row truth table. Okay, so the one we're actually trying to get into our table here, this will be our final column, is this whole statement. We need to make sure every part of the statement is in the table. C's already in here, it's an atomic statement. We also are going to need this whole statement in the table. That's right here. Okay, so now let's look at this one. Are all its parts in the table? We're going to need not G in the table, so okay, let's put it in here. And we also need A in the table, it's already in. Are all of this statement's parts in the table? We're going to need G, it's already in. Once we have it set up, we can use the disjunction and negation rules to fill in the table. So let's do that now. We want to figure out the truth value for each possibility in this column. We need to look at the column for G to figure out not G. So wherever G is true, not G is F. Wherever G is F, not G is true. Do it this way, just so it's clear. The lowercase t's and f's look a lot alike. Okay, done. Next step. And you can see it's also filled in so you can check your work. Next, we want to figure out the truth value for this disjunction, which means we have to look at the columns for the two disjuncts. One is not G and the other is A. So these yellow columns are the ones we need to look at. A disjunction is only false in one case, when both disjuncts are false. So let's look and find the rows where both disjuncts are false. Not that row, not that row, nope, nope. Here's one, put an F in. No. Here's another one, no. So those are the only two rows where both disjuncts are false. We can automatically fill in T's for everything else. And our final column, this is what we just filled in. Now again, it's a disjunction. This time one disjunct is C and the other disjunct is not G or A. So these are the two columns we need to look at to figure out the truth value of the complete statement. So again, let's just look for the rows where both parts are F. Not this row, nope, 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 nope. Here's one. Will there always be one? Not necessarily. Nope. Okay, there was only one. It's this one. So let's fill in T's for everything else. And that's the completed truth table for this statement. We now know every possible case. We know the truth value for this for every possible truth values that its parts could have. So if it turns out all of these were true, then the whole statement is true. If it turns out just A and C were true, but G was false, it's true. Okay, and then finally, some advice. After completing this homework, you should be ready to set up truth tables on your own, and you should go practice doing that, and definitely do practice exercises. If we go back to the materials, there is a printable sort of packet of exercises that you could get started on, and there are also links to exercises in the text. You should definitely be doing practice exercises beyond just the homework. All right, let's see how we did. Yay, we got a perfect score. Okay, so then the next assignment will definitely give you, I can't remember if this one switches out the questions or not, but the next one definitely does. And I recommend that you go do the practice packet and at least try your hand at a couple of them and see how you're doing before you move on to the next homework. Alternatively, you can take your first shot at the next homework and see how you do just after completing this. Maybe you've picked it up right away. But if you don't do well on your first attempt, your next move is to go back and study and do the practice exercises with complete solutions, revisit. Make sure you do read the whole text. I skipped over that before getting to this, but do read the pages 15 through 22 of the text and ask questions about specific examples as they arise. You definitely want to get this material down. It's fundamental for the next couple of weeks. Everything's going to build on this. Okay, good luck and have fun. If you enjoy puzzles and Sudoku and stuff, you'll probably like this material. That's everything for the week. Beyond that, check in. This week's check-in has a midterm course evaluation, so I look forward to getting feedback from you on what's going well and on what I can improve. Okay, have a great week.